Hello, so my name's Charles Osterman. I'm the Business Solutions Manager at Adams County, Colorado. And I've worked for Adams County for about 15 years now. So my group does a little bit of mix of GIS and a mix of business process improvement as well. Just to give you a little more information about what I like to do outside of work. So I really enjoy hiking around our beautiful state, and probably my favorite place to go hiking would be Rocky Mountain National Park. I think I've hiked most of the trails up there at this point, but not all of them. So let me pull up my presentation here. Okay, what happened? Share my screen, there we go. Okay, technology. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about how we use Survey 123 on our asset management system to improve the process for our concrete replacement program at Adams County. So we have a program called the Miscellaneous Concrete Program, and the goal of this program is really to go out and identify areas of concrete in the county that need to be repaired or replaced. And when I'm talking about concrete, I'm really talking about sidewalks and curbs and ramps. We really don't have a lot of concrete roads in the county. It is an annual program. It has about a $500,000 to $1 million budget, just depending on the year. And we will go out and focus on a specific neighborhood and try to do all the repairs in that neighborhood at once. A little bit of background on Adams County, if you're not familiar. It is a very long, skinny county here, as you can see. So it's 18 miles wide, but it is 72 miles long. So the western part of the county is kind of our more urban, more industrial or suburban area, and then pretty much all the white area you see on the eastern section of the map is rural and agricultural land. So when we're talking about sidewalks and concrete repairs, we're really focusing just on this area, this one urban area in the southwestern part of the county. So on this map, we've highlighted the sidewalks in green. You can see they're all concentrated there, except there are a few lonely sidewalks out there in Strasburg. We're trying to leave those guys out, but most of our effort is down in the southwestern part of the county. So historically, there's been two processes, or I guess two parties involved in the miscellaneous concrete program. So we have the field crews, which is our construction inspectors. So what they would do is they would create a blank Excel spreadsheet, and then they would actually print that out, and they would take it to the field with them and start identifying locations of sidewalk that needed to be repaired or replaced. So they would kind of jot down, what kind of work needed to be done and the location of the repairs. So they would write down something like, how many feet it is from the nearest intersection, or maybe the address number of the closest house, or some kind of description of where it's at. Then they would take that back to the other party involved, which are the engineers. And so the engineers would use that information, they would compile it and try to create a bid estimate, so we could bid out the project and select a consultant to do the work. And so once a consultant was hired, it would go back to the field crew, and they would go out and they would mark or paint on the sidewalk where the repairs needed to be done. And then of course they would actually supervise the work being performed to make sure it was done to standards and all that kind of thing. So this process was in place for quite a long time, but there were some issues that were starting to come up with it. There were probably two big things that were really creating problems. So one of the concerns was the amount of time it takes to do the data collection. So the inspectors estimated that it took about 2 weeks for them to get this process done, and there were multiple inspectors going out and doing this data collection. So they were looking to reduce the amount of time. Another thing that was happening is the engineer found it really difficult to come up with an accurate bid estimate based on the data they were getting. So this led to us having a problem where, we were frequently going over budget or we were going under budget. And when we went over budget, it led to either having to cut the program short or going and asking the commissioners for additional budget, which, nobody ever wants to do that. So that stuff was going on. There were some other things, like we had a little bit of inconsistent record keeping going on what work had been performed. There's a big time gap between when the data is collected and when the project actually starts. So that could be maybe 4 to 6 months gap there. And something else that was happening is the inspectors would take their written notes back out and try to mark the locations. And sometimes it was obvious where the repair needed to be, but other times it wasn't. And then we also had other things going on, like staff turnover or people changing roles. So maybe the inspector that was going out trying to mark the locations wasn't the one that actually gathered the data in the first place. And then there's other things that come up. So if you only have one record of where your work is to be performed and it's written down on a piece of paper and on somebody's desk, and they knock their coffee cup over and spill it all over the paper and wipe out what's written on there, then you have to start over trying to figure out what needs to be done. And that stuff does happen, unfortunately. So the infrastructure division, they approached us and asked for our assistance. They were like, hey, can we move this into the asset management system, or can we put this in GIS and go digital somehow? What can we do to make this more efficient? How can we make it work better? So for us, technology is the easy part. That we already had stuff in place. We already had a asset management system in place. It had been used for a couple of years. We already had GIS data about the locations of our sidewalks, our curbs, our ramps. And we already had a set of iPads that had been purchased to use with the asset management system's mobile app. So that stuff was already in place. The next thing we needed to do is we really needed to sit down with the inspectors. We needed to sit down with the engineers and talk about what their needs were. And we wanted to learn more about, what kind of fields we needed to have, what kind of data do they want to collect, and that kind of thing. So we got everybody together in the same room. And it really was an interesting process because you go into the project kind of assuming that they're already working together since they need to work together on this project, and that they're communicating. But when we got everybody together in the room, it kind of became apparent that they probably weren't communicating with each other very often at all. So it was interesting to listen to them talk, and the inspectors would talk about what they were doing, and the engineers would talk about what they were doing, and they would be like, hey, I didn't know you were doing that. And the other side would say, well, I didn't know you were doing that either. Why are we doing the same thing? So getting them to communicate more regularly and understand what each other is doing was a really interesting and helpful process, I think. So the solution we came up with, though, was to go ahead and use the mobile app from our asset management system, and the inspectors were going to go out and walk and drive the area like they always had. But instead of using the paper, they were going to record the location using the GPS on the iPad. And they were also going to record some specific things that the engineers wanted to make their bid estimate go a little smoother. So they were going to record the type of concrete. They were going to record how severe the damage was on a scale from 1 to 5. Then they were also going to pick up the length and width of the repair. Then the engineers would go into the asset management system, and they would export the data to Excel and generate their bid quantities from there. This is what the form looks like inside the app. You can see it just has the fields we talked about in here: the concrete type, the severity, the length, and the width, etc. So they would fill this information out. We did provide quite a bit of training to the inspectors. We did training in the office, and then we did training in the field as well. We went out and collected live data with them, made sure everybody was on the page and that they understood how it worked. So everybody did their data collection, and the results came back pretty positive. So the inspectors reported that they liked doing data collection on the iPad, so that was a huge relief for me. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, how they were going to take it, if they would if they were going to like not using the old process or not, but it seemed fairly positive. The engineer was really excited about having all the information together in the asset management system and not having to worry about where the paper was. They also really liked having pictures because before, if there were any questions that came up, they would have to go out and do a field visit to verify information. With a picture there, they could just look at the picture and see what was going on. Inspectors were reporting a good decrease in the data collection time. So remember, we were at about 2 weeks to start. And so now they were saying that they were down to probably about a week to do this data collection after you accounted for kind of the initial training time and stuff. And the engineer reported that they felt like their bid quantity was more accurate this time due to having more detailed data. But of course, it's the first year, our first attempt at doing this, so not everything went perfectly. There were some things we knew we were going to need to work on. So some things we noticed were that the results were a little bit inconsistent. So it seemed like there was some confusion over the different types of concrete in the pick list and exactly what the terms meant. There was some inconsistency in how people were collecting the severity field. And we also noticed that sometimes people were entering both the length and the width for items that didn't need a width, like curbs. So if you have a curb, it has this kind of a set width. Curbs are all the same. So we found that sometimes people would put in there, hey, it's 6 foot wide curb. And we were like, well, what's going on here? Is that a mistake, or did you mean to say that you want to replace the sidewalk? Why is there a width in this field? We did have some occasions where less tech-savvy crew members were continuing to try to record things on paper. So if they got frustrated with the app or whatever, maybe they would print out a map and go out and draw on it and then come back and try to enter that information into the system after the fact. So that was okay. I mean, that works, but then you're doing double work there because you're doing it twice, of course. And then there was still just some general confusion between parties, and we kind of just needed to set expectations about, hey, this is what the inspector's role is, this is what they're supposed to do, this is what the engineer's role is, and this is what they're going to do, this is what GIS role is, and this is what we're going to do. We need to make sure those things were clear, and I also needed to set expectations with the engineer about what could or couldn't be automated. So they were feeling frustrated that they had more accurate data, but it still took them a really long time to do that bid estimate. So I had to set some expectations about, hey, we can automate it up to a point, but you'll still have to do some manual work on the bid sheet just due to the nature of its complexity. There were some issues with the iPads and cell phone connectivity in the field. That's not something I anticipated because the data collection areas are in a highly urban environment. So I thought we would have strong cell coverage, but it seemed like that was not the case all the time. So we wanted to address that going forward too. So to improve on year one, we decided to look at Survey 123. Because it has a simpler form to fill out. We felt like it would be more intuitive, easier to use for people. And I'm going to run through exactly how our asset management system app works so you'll get a better idea of why we thought Survey 123 would be simpler. So here, if I'm going to go out and collect data, I'm going to collect a sidewalk location that needs to be repaired. The first thing I'd have to do is click this plus sign in the upper right corner. And then I need to tap on concrete replacement to say that's what I want to collect. And I have to do this every time I start a new point. That would open this window about the address. So this was a little bit confusing because at the bottom, it's got the, the geolocator address. And then at the top, you have a manual address field. And sometimes they would both come out the same. Sometimes they wouldn't. It just was kind of unclear what you were supposed to do on this screen. And I really couldn't find a way to get rid of it. It was always here. So that was kind of confusing. But you'd hit next, go past this screen, and you would be at the form. So here I've chosen curb and gutter 2 foot as my concrete type. But again, kind of speak what I was talking about. Somebody's entered the width is 5 and the length is 10. Well, why did you enter 5 foot when it's 2 foot curb and gutter? What does that mean? We don't know exactly. Another issue that wasn't a big deal, but it was created some difficulty was these field names are getting cut off. as you can see here. So I didn't have much control over the design of this form. So really the only option I have is to just shorten the field names like I did with the two above these. But these are concrete replacement area, asphalt replacement area. And we had originally set it up so the inspectors would calculate the area while they were collecting data, but you know, it's so 5 foot times 10 foot is 50 square feet. That's not too big of a deal, but it's not, excuse me, it's not asking for, sorry about that. It's not asking for square feet, it's asking for square yards. So that's more difficult to do, right? You got to pull out the calculator and figure it out. So that isn't going to happen in the field. We did that after the fact. So then you would hit save, and it would take you to this screen. And on this screen, you would click the plus sign down here in the corner, and that would take you to another screen where you would take the picture. And once you've taken your pictures, then what would happen is it would bring you back here again. And it's like, okay, what do I do now? How do I get back to collecting data? You'd click this back button up here. It would take you back to the data collection screen. So we decided to go ahead and try Survey 123 because we felt like it would be more intuitive. There's also some cool things we could do. So we could build logic into the form. So if you selected curb as your concrete type, then we could hide the width field, for example. It's also possible to take Survey 123 offline, which at the time our asset management system app did not have. So that kind of reduced that connectivity issue we were having. The pictures that were being taken were stored as attachments in an ArcGIS online feature service. We have a really great integration between our asset management system and the GIS, and that was important because this meant we didn't have to stand up a separate GIS viewer for people to view this data and to view the pictures. The attachments synchronize back to the asset management system automatically, and they can be viewed there. So to make some improvements again for year two, we got everybody back in the room and started having meetings again. We really wanted to clarify what the engineer needed to make their bid estimates more efficient. So I asked them a ton of questions, tried to really hammer down what they were trying to collect and how they needed to have the data presented to make it easier for them. So we worked on that and made some changes to the form for their needs. A decision was also made that the inspectors were going to go ahead and collect all the defects they found. So they're going to drive down the street. Every time they see something wrong with the sidewalk, they're just going to collect it, no matter how severe it is or how bad it is. Before, some of the inspectors were doing that, but some of the inspectors were also deciding to just pick up the ones they thought should be replaced. So a decision was made that everything would be collected, and the engineer was going to make the final decision about what would get done and what wouldn't get done based on our available budget. We also found that if two inspectors went out and they looked at the same piece of sidewalk, one might rank it a 2 and one might rank it a 4 on that severity scale. So we knew we needed standards for severity. So a standards document was developed for that, and it outlined exactly what does it mean to be a 1, what does it mean when sidewalk's a 2, what does it mean when it's a 3, etc. So that helped cut down on that variation. We also set standards for taking pictures. So the first year, everybody just took a picture of the damage to the concrete, but when the engineer was looking at it, they were like, hey, the sidewalk's buckled, but I don't know why it's buckling. I mean, is there something else wrong with the street? Is there a drainage problem? What's going on? So a standard was set that you had to take one picture that showed the street and the surrounding area, and then another picture that showed the damage in detail. So this is what the Survey 123 form looks like. Here I've selected gutter type 2, which is just curb and gutter, and you can see that now I only have the length field and the width field is hidden. So that's pretty good data check. If you're out collecting data and you're like, hey, where's my width field? I really need to put in the width. Well, then chances are you've picked the wrong type of concrete to start with. And just to show here, I've picked curb, gutter, and walk, which is just sidewalk, and now I have both the width and the length fields visible. This is a, one other thing I wanted to say about this too while I'm at it. Here we have the width and the length, and you'll remember that area field we had before. It's still there, but it's completely hidden now. The user never sees it, and we were able to set up the calculation within survey 123. So after they enter the width and the length, it automatically calculates the area in square yards, and that information is pushed into the asset management system. And then here it shows we have this other type of work called remove vegetation, which is just going out and trimming overgrown bushes or whatever that maybe are obstructing the sidewalk, and that doesn't have a width or length at all. So those fields are now both completely hidden. Some other cool things about this were, you know, the field names are not getting cut off anymore. Also able to put in this help text here to remind you what the field's about, which was probably most helpful for severity. Just a quick reminder that, hey, 1's the worst and 5's the best, in case you forget how that works. We kept the address fields in here kind of to account for the accuracy of the iPad's GPS. So for the most part, we found it to be accurate enough for this project. So maybe we were getting within 5 to 10 feet with the iPad, but they said that was accurate enough to be able to go out and find where the repair is. But sometimes it was putting it in, you know, it would just throw it in someone's backyard or something. It was like way off. So having the address on a location description would help figure out where that was supposed to be. We did put out the option of doing, you know, higher accuracy, post-corrected data or something like that. But that had an additional cost associated with it, and they chose not to do that at that time. And of course, the most important thing, all of this is on one screen. So you fill out the field, you take your picture at the bottom, you hit save, and it goes right back to the next point. So it eliminates all those different screens we had with the other app. This is what it looks like inside our asset management system. So you can see all the defect points there on the map, the list down below. So typically the engineer would go through here and they would put a filter on this layer and say, show me everything that's severity 1 and severity 2, because that's the most severe damage. And we'll look at all of that. And then if we still have budget left over, we'll start looking at 3 or 4 severity. So they put that on their filter, and then they would export the data to Excel like this, and then they would manipulate it however they needed to get their bid estimate put together. The results for year 2 were really good. We received very positive feedback about the ease of use for Survey 123. Everybody seemed to like the changes. They liked that they had the option of using it on their phone or their iPad, whatever they preferred. Before we were iPad only, so it ran on multiple platforms, which was really helpful. We experienced a 60% reduction in time to collect data over our original 2-week time frame for the paper process. So our best inspector was, you know, our quickest inspector was reporting that they were done in 2 or 3 days with their data collection using Survey 123. And then, you know, some of the other people, it took a little longer, but that's okay. Everybody learns at a different speed, but everybody did complete their work through Survey 123 this time. We did not have anybody using paper forms. The engineer was happy. Their big quantities came out pretty accurate, and the work was completed on budget, so we weren't seeing those big variations where we were going way over or way under. And of course, we have the exciting part of having collaboration between teams. So the inspectors and the engineers are now communicating back and forth when issues come up on the project, or if they need clarification on an item or whatever. You know, after having been in the room together and in meeting about these things, they were more comfortable going ahead and communicating with each other directly. So what did we learn from all of this? You know, kind of like I mentioned before, technology is the easy part. Technology we already had in place. We just need to set it up to work. But the most important things we needed to have in place were documented standards, a documented workflow, and clear communication between teams, making sure everybody knew what the expectations were, what they were responsible for, and just that, you know, everything stayed to standard. And of course, having management buy-in to make sure everything goes smoothly and that everybody's on board. So those are the most important things we found. We also found that, you know, simple changes to the app that made it easier to use made a huge difference in our participation and people's perception of it. So I felt like the asset management's app wasn't that difficult to use, but I'm used to using technology, right? So When we moved from there to the survey 123, it eliminated people's frustrations with the multiple screens, and they felt like their concerns were really heard, and they felt like we addressed what they were asking for. And I think that made a big difference in people's perception of the program and getting them to participate with using Survey 123. So going forward, there are a few more things that we'd like to do. So we kind of like to have an automated process to link these repair points that we're collecting to our sidewalk and curb assets as much as possible. And by that, I mean, you know, our sidewalk and curb stuff is linear, they're linear features in GIS. So of course, when you go out and do repairs to sidewalk, you don't replace the whole feature from intersection to intersection, you only replace the part that's broken. So there's a disconnect between us connecting these points and linking them back to the actual sidewalk asset in the asset management system. So we'd like to find a way to connect those two together in a more automated way, and to also maybe more use our asset management system in a more proactive way to identify areas that need to be repaired instead of going out and doing so much data collection. Of course, there's also challenges being presented by our new remote work environment. So we've had some people take on new roles at the county, which is exciting. But it also means there's a new engineer on the project, and there's a new inspector on the project, and those people need to be trained, and we need to make sure they understand all the things that the old team understood to keep the process going smoothly. So for me, the challenge is just to keep up momentum with this, to make sure everybody's trained and talking to each other in the remote work environment. It's just a little different. We're all used to just going down the hall and talking to each other. So it's taking that extra step and actually setting up the Zoom meeting and keeping momentum going. But overall, yeah, I think the program has gone really well. I think it's been a success. We're excited to see what happens with it in the future. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for your time, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.